we made it through another week. It is Friday, 7 p.m. Central Time, 5 p.m. Pacific Time. And it's that time of the week that we've all been looking forward to. We can shake off the residue of the week, relax a little bit, unwind, and enjoy some absolutely fantastic wine with a favorite person of ours, Anna Keller. And we're going to introduce Anna in a second more formally, but recognize everybody that we're here for a reason. We're sheltered in place, which actually stands for SIP. We're trying to make the most of it. There is such a thing as social rapport. So if we can do something together around wine, let's absolutely do that, because we're going to get through this together. And when we come out on the other side, we will have all of these connections established and know all of these great winemakers and winery owners, and we're going to want to go visit them. And there is certainly an individual in a winery that you're going to want to go visit, and we're featuring them this evening. And I am proud and absolutely humbled to introduce you to Anna Keller from Keller Estates.
Hello, Martin. How are you?
I am fine. It is challenging for me to not be as attractive as you. So I can see people, drapes outside in the alley. It's a very strong reflection, but I am thrilled to finally get a white wine into our portfolio mix for the Friday night sip events, because it means that spring is hopefully right around the corner in places outside of California. And speaking of spring, I have seen some evidence of that in the vineyards, because bud break pictures are starting to come across my Instagram stream and Facebook stream. So let's orient people with regards to where you are in Sonoma and from a physical geographic location.
Well, so we are on the southern tip of Sonoma County. We are about 45 minutes north of San Francisco on the coast. We are south of the town of Petaluma.
South of the Petaluma Gap.
South of the Petaluma Gap.
Okay, so how far away from the San Francisco Peninsula?
We are 40 minutes north of San Francisco.
Okay. And where in relation to Sonoma Square?
We are 7 miles west of Sonoma Square. We are about 20 minutes away from Nevada, from Marin County.
Okay.
For people who have come to Sonoma County and they've seen the racetrack, we are right around the racetrack. Sonoma County, so the Sonoma used to be called the Infinium Raceway. Now it's Sonoma Raceway.
Got it. Okay, so now I can kind of get a feel for that. So south of Santa Rosa.
South of Santa Rosa.
By a good amount. And how far from the coast?
We are about 8 miles away from the coast. But
okay.
What's very unique of where we are is, although we're not on the coast comes to us through the winds of the Petaluma Gap.
See, and we're going to talk a little bit about that with regards to the Petaluma Gap and the influence that has on the vineyards specifically. I'm curious why you chose that location.
Why I chose the location?
Yep.
Well, I really didn't choose it. I have to say, we had it chosen for us. My dad bought this property back in 1983, and he bought it because it was a beautiful place. It's sort of a little tucked away gem in the southern tip of Sonoma County. He was happy that it was beautiful. It was pristine. We have the marshlands in front of us, so it's kind of a beautiful open space. And it was only 40 minutes away from San Francisco, so it was still, realistic to drive up and drive back down to Marin County, where they had their home.
Okay, outstanding. So he bought it, and his name is Arturo, correct?
That's correct.
All right, so Arturo buys it in 1983, and he bought it because he's a passionate car enthusiast, and I don't think I can overstate that.
You can't overstate that. He breathes cars, loves cars. He's loved them ever since he was a little boy. My grandmother said that he used to line little cars from his bedroom to the kitchen. And if he could still line them from, he's doing now, he's enjoying his self-isolation, reading about books, and just thinking about books all day. So he does love cars.
So this is the connection I'm trying to make, is he bought the land in 1983 because of the rolling hills and the topography. And the idea, if I remember the story correctly, was that he thought this would be a great place to put a track down and drive cars.
So I don't think he didn't have a crystallized vision of what he was going to do, but he clearly knew that he loved driving up to where we were. They thought it would be a beautiful place to settle as they thoughtfully retired. And they wanted a place where they could work on the cars. A lot of the cars that they love are old vintage cars that need some tweaks before you take them out on the roads. So the idea was to build a garage where they could work on the cars, and then they build a road around the property so that they could test drive the cars as they worked on them. Eventually, they realized that Petaluma, being a multi-agricultural region with very few vineyards back in that day,
Right.
that they wanted to plant something. And as they drove through this area, and they drove through Carneros, which by the mid 80s was already well planted, they thought, well, vineyards may be something that would do well here.
And were you a child at this time? Were you a college graduate? Were you starting to find wine yourself? Or walk me through that journey of discovery.
Are you trying to ask me how old I am?
No, I'm trying not to ask you that.
Well, I was actually right around that age. I was in college, and
Okay.
I love plants. I've always loved plants. As a high schooler, I used to have succulents in my bedroom window, and I knew I wanted to do something with plants. I thought I'd be doing pharmaceutical chemistry, and I was going to be working with medicinal plants.
Wait, hang on a second. So in high school, you thought you would be doing pharmaceutical chemistry?
I knew I wanted to do medicinal plants.
Wow. I went to school in Colorado, and medicinal plants had a much different meaning.
Well, I grew up in Mexico City. They didn't have that dramatic. I think high schoolers and medicinal plants, it all comes down basically to the same plant.
Absolutely. And so you're in college, you're driving back and forth with your parents from the Bay Area, coming up here, and it has to be spectacular because where you are right now is just postcard pretty. It is just so idyllic that I don't know how you don't picture yourself every single morning.
I do. You know what? This is probably the hardest part of this entire quarantine, is that I am so privileged, and it feels so selfish to be in this beautiful place and not be able to share it. So that's why our Instagram has been loaded with beautiful, inspiring and serene photo shots, because it's just idyllic. And as I said, they didn't know at the time, but in front of us are the marshlands. And behind that, there's a beautiful park. And so we are surrounded by nature that is going to be pristine for generations to come. So that has just been, and the wildlife around here, we have this, we've got hummingbirds galore right now with spring onsetting. And so it is really beautiful.
And so in the 80s, they start to plant, and I'd like to welcome the Marcellas, the Bests. And by the way, Anna, you sat with Bill Best at the Peninsula in Chicago when you were here for dinner, and also the Greasies. Thank you so much for joining. Some local fans.
If I can see the names. It's wonderful to see you guys.
That's amazing that you can see the names. That's something else. I'm shining on my forehead and I'm blind. I can't see any names. But the chemistry side of things, I'm fascinated by. The planting of the vines, which was very fortuitous, obviously, in the late 80s, early 90s. And how did you decide on the varietals of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay?
So at that point in our family's history, I was still not involved, but my parents went to Davis and they talked to people there and said, we are located in this area. What can we plant? And they said, you know what, plant Chardonnay. Pinot Noir is very difficult to grow, even though it's a cool variety and a cool climate variety, not only
Right.
cool. But plant Chardonnay. If worst case scenario, if it doesn't ripen because it's so cold out there, you can always sell it to a sparkling wine producer. As people may know, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir are traditionally used for champagne, but it's picked very early. And
Right.
so that's what they were hedging their bets, saying, well, if it doesn't ripen, I'm sure some sparkling house could use it.
And there's worse things to have happen where you are moving wine over to a famous sparkling house. And before I go a step further, welcome Jacqueline Renee. And Jacqueline Renee is another Sonoma producer who's going to be featured in a couple of weeks. Keith Oswald from Atlanta. Happy to see you, brother. And Allie and Marnie, you guys are awesome. Corey and Renee, hope you're surviving the Dallas heat. Thanks so much for jumping in. So I understand the Pinot Noir aspect, and you're right, it's an extremely finicky grape, very difficult. But you mentioned something that is important for your geography. You mentioned cool climate, because Pinot Noir, as you know, does not like to have high temperature fluctuations, doesn't like to have what Cabernet actually loves, as a matter of fact, to go from 75 degrees at night to 95 degrees or more in the day. Not a problem for Cabernet. Pinot Noir, not so much. So there's a coastal influence that is important for exactly where you are. And I think it's actually fascinating because those of us in the Midwest or those of us in the Southeast or the Northeast, we don't recognize per se a lot of that fog that comes in. So talk to me about that phenomenon.
So what we've learned is that the reason, this a lot of grape growing is very dependent on what they call diurnal shifts, how hot it gets and how cold it gets. And we are very lucky that on the coast, the mountain range runs parallel to the coast. At Bodega Bay, which is very close to us, it runs perpendicular to the coast. And with this, instead of the fog that rolls into Sonoma County, the wind is allowed to come breezing through, and it moves in from Bodega Bay down to the San Pablo Bay, essentially creating a wind tunnel. So how we get cooled, it's not because we get rain, we get snow in winter, or we don't. It's not the same kind of coldness that you guys get in Chicago. The way we get cold consistently every afternoon. Right now, if you look out my window, the wind is blowing and it's getting cool down. It's cooler in the afternoon. The warmest temperatures we get is probably between noon and 3 o'clock. Then it starts cooling down. So as the year progresses, it gets steadily warmer, but it continues to cool down every evening. And that's what brings in the coolness to our region.
Interesting. And Chardonnay in particular and Pinot Noir specifically love that. Nelson Hildine, nice to see you. Laura F., nice to see you. Cindy from New Jersey is in the house. Chardonnay and Pinot Noir are actually perfect for that region. And you have a particularly styled Chardonnay. And it's kind of funny because Chardonnay is interesting because there's a California style Chardonnay and then there's a French Chablis Montrachet style Chardonnay. How do you describe yours and what flavor profile are you after?
So we started making our Oro de Plata, which I've got right here, and I hope you guys have it at home, and if not, you know where to get it. So we started making this wine back in 2003.
Wait, you said Oro de Plata?
Oro de Plata. So in Spanish, it means gold from silver. So it's the gold Chardonnay, and it's fermented in stainless steel.
Oh, so, nice. I did not know that.
Well, you learn something every Friday.
I do. Thank you. What are you doing next Friday?
I'm watching you. So what we wanted to do back in 2003, we realized that a lot of the California Chardonnays were big, buttery, oaky Chardonnays, and you were losing a little bit of the purity of tasting Chardonnay fruit as such. So we wanted to go back and kind of capture that beautifulness, freshness that the Chardonnay can have. As you know, we are 100% estate. And what estate means is that you only have the fruit that you have. I don't go out and buy fruit from other growers. All I can do is find the difference and the nuances between the fruit that we grow on our property. And we grow a particular kind of Chardonnay, a clone of Chardonnay called Wente. And Wente tends to be this beautiful small berries, very fragrant, a little bit more flowery in aromas and kind of beautiful and citrusy. And it's just a very delicate Chardonnay. We thought it would look we wanted everybody at home to enjoy that beautiful purity of fruit that we had. So instead of fermenting the wine in oak, what we did is ferment it in stainless steel, which is not going to give any additional flavors. So that would allow us to really capture the Chardonnay flavors. And then what we do is we allow the wine to age. Once we finish with fermentation, we move it to neutral oak. And neutral oak basically is oak that has had a few years of use. So it won't give any flavors, but what it will do is give the wine texture. I always believe that wine should be enjoyed with food. And for me, great food wine has to have texture.
Okay, so let's geek out a little bit because that's what we do. And when you say texture, kind of walk the folks that are watching and listening what you mean by texture.
So what I mean by texture is that when you enjoy a sip of the wine, it coats all your mouth, and you can feel it cleansing your palate. That's why everybody should swish their wine as you're doing right now, so that you can really enjoy the flavors throughout your mouth and enjoy the acid that you get at the front, the fruit that you get in your mid palate, and then you get that nice watering, cleansing feeling. So you're ready for another bite of food.
Well, and you described it perfectly. And I encourage everyone to, if they haven't purchased any of your wine through Cellar Angels, shame on them. And but some of you that have, I want you to kind of write in the comment line exactly what Anna just described and what you're feeling, because you're precisely right. It has a weight to it in the mouth that is, it's substantial. I mean, it has body to it, which is great. But then that acid in the mid palate is so wonderfully balanced. And then there is a cleansing aspect that is there from the fresh acidity. And with food, and I'm going to ask you to name some foods, I can only imagine that this is just going to be a perfect combination. So what would you have with this? I'm going to write a word down to see if you're getting what I'm getting.
Well, this is always kind of a bright, crisp wine. I call it Gore de Plata as my takeout wine. And the reason why I always call it my takeout wine is it does great with spicy food. And a lot of the food that we generally do on takeout tends to be spicy, ethnic food from a lot of different places. So it'll do great with Thai food. It'll do great with a curry. Chardonnay is a very benevolent wine to pair. And we have beautiful acidity in the wine, which is what kind of cleanses and it gives it brightness. And that really allows it to play with anything that's spicy.
That's interesting because I did not write down spicy.
What did you write down?
I wrote down shellfish.
Huh.
Because, and here's why I'm thinking shellfish. I'm thinking anything with drawn butter, because of that acid that can cut through that. I can definitely see spiciness. And Anna, if you bear with me a second, I have to say hello to someone. Hello, Fez. And also Megan Vendette. She is a sister from another mister. And Carrie Randall. Carrie Randall, actually, those are both angels.
I see that she's enjoying the wine too. So I'm glad you're enjoying it, Carrie.
And they're crazy talented, sophisticated somms as well. So we are blessed to have them on the team. But I love the way you describe the Chardonnay, because it isn't that cloying, unctuous, typical oaky butter Chardonnay. It has that acidity on it. And I think that is so important. So is that what you are after? And how do you find that when you're walking the vines and determining when to pick? Carry me through that whole aspect.
Well, we were talking about the wind and the coolness, and the acid is something that is naturally in our grapes. So if we look at the chemical composition of grapes, you have the skins and the juice. The juice is mainly water, sugar, and acid, and the skins of the grapes predominantly has flavors, polyphenols, and a lot of tannins and structural components for wine. But this acid is in the fruit, it's in the juice. As the evening cools down, this acid is retained in the fruit. So it never, the acid stays in the grapes, and when we pick it, you have what they call natural acidity. You can always add, a lot of mass-produced wines, they go into the winery and they add a bunch of acid back to it. But this natural acidity that we have is due to this coolness that we have every afternoon. And if you taste our lineup of wines at Keller Estate, you will see that acidity in our Chardonnays and our Pinot Noirs and the Syrah. And the acidity gives the wines brightness, but it also, one of the beautiful things is that it allows the wines to age really gracefully.
Well, it's something I can already feel. It's mouthwatering. So I'm very excited about this wine. And the same thing with the Pinots. And your estate is spectacularly beautiful. Tell me about the acreage, and then I have a couple questions about the agricultural techniques and strategies that you have.
So we grow about 92 acres of vineyards.
Oh, wow.
It's a lot of vineyard. About half Chardonnay, half is Pinot Noir. We have a drizzle of Pinot Gris and a drizzle of Syrah, but predominantly Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Because we're 100% estate, and I I had great mentors throughout my career. And as I started in the business, Ted Lemon was our consultant winemaker. And he always was about the idea that if you had a solid vineyard, you'd be all right. You could screw up a vintage here or there, but if you had a good vintage, next year, you'd be able to come back to the vineyard. And so by having a well planned out vineyard, you'd be able to weather different situations and learn and get familiar with your grapes. Our Chardonnay is really, so what we did is we planted very different varietals of Chardonnay.
Okay. And so is the Winty your go-to varietal for clone?
No, we do. Actually, the first varietal that we planted was a very romantic name called Clone 4. But Clone 4 was widely planted in the 80s in California. So because we started planting since the 80s and we've continually planted till the 2000s, we have a lot of different, we learned as we planted. So some of the first vines that we planted, the spacing was different. Then as time progressed, we understood better the orientation. We changed some of the rootstock. We adapted some of the vineyard. So you learn, like everything in life, you don't grow, you don't start knowing everything.
Well, now, and let's talk about the growing aspect because, and hello, James Simmons. Hello, Dwayne Dappin. Long time no see. Hope you're doing well. James Simmons, you might know Anna because he's the talent behind our film crew who's done a couple of things, and his favorite word in addition to wine is magic. But as far as the growing, and you're right, you go into this your first year, it's romantic. You're like, hey, let's plant vines. This is going to be a lot of fun. And then 22 years later, you've learned a few things or more. How has the density of growing the vines, and how did you decide to do everything organic? And I mean, it is not an occupation for the faint of heart.
Oh, definitely not. And it's scary. It is. It's always it's rewarding, but it's scary. The first thing is that the reason why I decided that we should start farming organically about 6 years ago. I was convinced that it was better for our grapes. It was better for our land. It was better for the environment. But being convinced and actually being able to become organic has also been a road. And the hardest part has been kind of, our vineyard manager used to have a toolbox. If I had mildew, if I had this problem, this is what I used to balance it out. He knew what tools he had, what chemicals he could use. And all of a sudden, I took away that toolbox and I said, well, let's figure out a new toolbox. And so when we started doing that, it really has been a journey. And I've approached it step by step. Our first goal was to really get our soils healthy. So we started building the organics from the soil up, changing our compost, bringing in sheep. And so we have sheep that graze the entire vineyard and they fertilize. And so we, little by little, there was no recipe. The more I looked for people to tell me how to go about it, the less I found somebody to give you a cookie cutter recipe. You have to start really asking, and a lot of times, and I really encourage all of the wine lovers out there, you hear broad statements about things that we do in the wine business. Dry farmed wines. Oh, that's the way to go. But it may or may not apply for a particular vineyard. For example, where we have really heavy clay soils. We are sort of at the base of the valley, really heavy clay soils that used to be the ancient seabeds of the San Pablo Bay. But as you all know, clay cracks. Think of if you've ever done a clay project, once it dries, it starts cracking. So if we don't water our soils, then everything's going to start cracking, and that exposes the roots. And if you expose roots to air, they die. Anybody who's tried to repot a plant and forgotten about it and try to come back and the roots dry, they know what I'm talking about.
Or everybody or anybody that has left clay pots out in the Midwest during winter also knows what you're talking about.
Oh, good. I'm glad you found an analogy for the Midwest.
Yes. The Greg Clay.
I'm going to interrupt.
I'm sorry.
I'm going to say hello to Gary Scarlack, who just.
I was just going to do that. Gary, say hello. Sean Manning, interesting question. How many sheep do you have?
300.
Holy cow, 300
Holy sheep.
And that was designed to do keep growth down, just help fertilize, all of the above?
All of the above. We started with 20 and we started understanding how to work with them. And then we found a great sheep herder partner who needed space. So we partner up and Ed does the sheep herding and we do the land. So it's a great partnership that we have.
Now you have an awesome balance of body and acidity that I find absent in most California Chardonnays that do a malolactic fermentation process. What are your thoughts on mallow, and how do you balance that oak butter, I guess, proclivity by the mainstream to have that with something that is germane and pure to the grape varietal soil?
So I'll answer right away, but I will say hi to Robin and Carlos, who also just joined us.
Oh my goodness. Hello, Robin and Carlos. Thank you for joining.
Carlos works out with me at the gym, so he always knows. He sees me early in the morning, and he knows I'm all about wine.
I love it.
So actually, our Chardonnay, we make 2 Chardonnays. And my goal in making the wines at Keller Estate is to show the diversity of the grapes that we have. But Oro de Plata, we also harvest it. And what we do is we ferment it in stainless steel. And we do not let the wine undergo malolactic fermentation. So just getting a little geeky, we all know that malolactic fermentation, there's 2 fermentations in wine, sugar to alcohol, and the secondary fermentation, which is malic acid, which is present in the juice, can or not turn into lactic acid. We do not allow that fermentation to happen. So we stay with that really bright, crisp malic acid, which is the same acid that we find in apples, whereas lactic acid is sort of the acid that we find in cream and butter. So it's a little bit kind of softer acid. We wanted really to showcase the brightness that we have. And the reason why I had brought up the clay a little while ago is that this minerality, or the weight that we feel of the wine, is also due to the minerals that are on the property and that the vines take up. And we have that sense of weightiness and minerality, is the way we call it in the wine world.
There's a bunch of different questions there I can go with. I love that you don't do mallow, number one. And I also love that you have a desire to let the fruit speak. So it almost sounds like a minimal intervention. You just want to just carry what the vineyard is doing. What is the average age of your Chardonnay vines?
20 years.
All right, which is pretty old in the region.
It is pretty old.
And the Petaluma Gap, that fog, or nature's air conditioner, that contributes. It has to be a huge product of the philosophy behind growing what you're growing, and when you harvest, or all of the above.
Well, one of the things that's a challenge as an estate is that the majority of the fruit ripens relatively at the same time. So we have to be very diligent about picking the fruit for specific reasons. So some of the fruit we will pick a little bit earlier because it may not have as much flavor, but it's going to have great acid. Then a portion of the fruit we allow to age for a little bit longer, so it's going to have maybe a little bit less acid, but great fruit. And I saw one of the questions here was if we did anything with the moon cycles, and we definitely do our best to. We know the days that are. So I've always had an analogy for life, and I have 8 nieces. And I've always said it's really easy to know who you don't want to date than who you want to date. And that's by elimination.
Absolutely.
The same thing I do with grape growing. We know what days we don't want to pick, and so those days are off the calendar, and we just allow the days that are better for picking. So we do follow the lunar cycle for as much as we can, but we have our own crew. And our own vineyard crew can only do what they can do. So sometimes when push comes to shove, we have to do some operations when the time's not perfect.
And so let's harken back to those 80s days when you were in college and your parents had this grandiose idea to do this, and then maybe fast forward, you come out of college. Where did you first get into wine?
So I first got into wine. I was still going through my life as a biochemist, and I was doing a master's in London. And a friend of my then boyfriend, now husband, invited us to take a wine appreciation course at the London School of Economics. So
no way.
That's how we started. And you would buy your 6 glasses, and that was, and you would arrive in class and you would drink wine. And I honestly, I think my husband was more into the wine tasting than I was. I'll be perfectly honest about that one. But that's how we got into describing wines. And from there, we just kept drinking wines in our early 20s. Then I got back and I was finishing my master's. My dad at that time had been starting to sell grapes, and we were very fortunate that Rombauer, this is 1993, 1994, was looking for grapes, and Rombauer couldn't find any Carneros Chardonnay. And Carneros is a little bit east from us. And so they kept going further west and further west, trying to find somebody with Chardonnay grapes. They found us and they started liking the grapes and they started buying grapes. So for a few years, we didn't make any wine. We sold fruit exclusively to Rombauer. Then one day, my dad had the brilliant idea of telling them to keep 1 ton for himself and ferment it for him, and he would just keep that ton. Little did he know that 1 ton of fruit produces 60 cases of wine.
Right.
So nobody could drink 60 cases of Chardonnay a year. That's just a little bit too much.
Maybe. I mean, you can give it a good college effort.
Yeah, we do our best. We're overachievers here.
That's right.
But that's how I got. And so he was having this 1 ton of wine being fermented. And at some point he got a call saying, we have a stuck fermentation. What do you want to do with it? And he didn't know what to do. And he turned to me, who I was in the middle of finishing my PhD at that point. And he said, do you have time to go up and learn about this? So I went up and I fell in love. It was fermentation at first sight.
Okay, well, back up a second, because you used a phrase which some people have probably heard of, but most probably have not. And you referenced a stuck fermentation. And for many people, maybe they saw the movie Bottle Shock, which was a extremely loose adaptation, but it was also predicated on a stuck fermentation in that time period. What is a stuck fermentation? When does it happen? Why does it happen? And how do you get out of it?
So when you bring in the juice from the vineyard and you now have turned the grapes into juice, you can either inoculate, add yeast, or you can allow the natural yeast in the vineyard which is there to start fermenting the sugar to alcohol. Sometimes if the temperature is not right, it's too cold, or there's not the right balance of nutrients in the juice, the yeast don't thrive. And if they don't thrive, they die out. And so that was probably what was happening back then, that it was a very cold year, and in the cellar, they hadn't stirred it enough, they hadn't done all of the work, they hadn't maybe been as vigilant as they should have been in ensuring that the wines kept moving into dropping the sugar, little by little fermenting that sugar into alcohol.
Oh, so they look around, they go, hey, get the biochemist in here.
Well, no, I think the winemaker there, when you're custom crushing, you still have to make decisions on your wine. And
Sure.
At that point, we were custom crushing, and he just said, do you want us to reinoculate with this yeast or with that yeast? And somebody had to make that decision, which my dad, as a civil engineer, was probably not the most qualified person to do. So that's how I got involved. And I never finished my PhD. I don't regret it. It took me many years to decide to put those notebooks away, but it was just love at first sight. I really enjoy the scientific aspect of grape growing and the balance between it being intuitive in terms of, here's what I'm tasting, here's what I like, then how do I go back into the vineyard and into the cellar? I saw one of the questions that we had was that if we used any, what kind of tanks we used, and we have a concrete egg at the winery. You might remember the egg. And we do ferment a portion of our Chardonnay in the egg, which is a concrete egg. And the difference between fermenting in stainless steel, fermenting in oak, fermenting in the concrete will give you slightly different flavors. And our goal in the winemaking process is really to allow ourselves the most subtle nuances between the different lots that we have. So we will choose some of the fruit to put into the concrete egg, which is going to make it even more bright, and we're going to have more minerality. But if we only had that, it would be way too much. So a portion of it goes into the stainless steel, which is going to give bright fruit. And then a portion may go directly into the neutral oak, which will be a little bit softer. So it's the mix of all of those differences that at the end, I sit down with our winemaker, Julian, and we try to see what is going to make the most balanced blend today, and also how it's going to age, so that if you have it at home, and I have a 2013 Oro de Plata behind me, and that still has a beautiful brightness to it. It may not have all of the fruit that the 16 has, but it has matured in a beautiful way.
Well, and I think, and I can appreciate, I certainly cannot appreciate the scientific wisdom that you have, and the book and collegiate studies, because I was not a biochemist. But I can appreciate the romantic aspect of that union of science, art, and nature, and how that is constantly changing. And so you may want to have a certain attribute be present, but if Mother Nature's not giving you the conditions for that, you've got to go back to the drawing board, and you have to, you're really at the mercy of what happens, which is why this is, as we talked about earlier, this is not an industry or certainly a passion for the faint of heart. But when you do end up with a product like this and what you have in your Pinot Noir, where it is special and it does move people and it is ethereal, that I think is gratifying.
Couldn't have said it any better. I think you were asking me a little bit, and I go out, and there's years where we grow grapes and we still sell a portion of our fruit and a portion we keep. And there's years when I just go out a year like right now, and we have it's right now. This is sort of like all hopes are there. It's the beginning of spring. We don't know if we're going to have a big year, a small year. We don't know if the year's going to bring heat or not. We don't know if we're going to have heat waves. We don't know if there's going to be, we don't know what's out there waiting for us as the year progresses in terms of the vintage. So we've got all the hope is there, but we live with the consequences of for previous years. If we had big years, people may have a lot of fruit or a lot of wines in their cellars, and they're not ready to buy more. And so I think that as a small grower, you're constantly looking at I always say we live like in three eras. We're growing the fruit. We're growing fruit that we won't taste for 4 years. We're producing fruit that we'll taste in 3 years. We're selling fruit that we made 2 years ago. So it's always, you're living in sort of, when I go back and do tasting notes, all of a sudden I was like, so what exactly happened in 2018? Was that the year that we had the heat wave? No, that was 17. So you're always sort of living in different spaces at the same time, which is fascinating for me.
Is that, I can see where that would be fascinating, but also extremely frustrating. What is the hardest thing about this industry?
Well, somebody once told me that the wine industry is the only industry in the world that voluntarily retains inventory. So I'll let you hear that for a second, right? We have this, we produce it, and then we don't sell it. But if it's going well, if everybody loves this wine and I'm sold out, that's it. I only had what I had. And so I can only hope that the next vintage will be even better than the previous vintage. So that's always difficult, knowing what you're going to be able to produce the following year, how to be able to plan for the future. How, we can never, it seems I started making, our first vintage was our first vintage came out September 2001, right before 9/11.
Oh boy.
Oh boy, yeah, exactly. So people would tell me about the good old 90s and how it was great to sell wine in the 90s, and people would buy these expensive Pinot Noirs in San Francisco with burgers, and I just never saw those days. So we started at a time where it was tough. And then we started growing little by little, and we had solidified our business, and then 2008 came around and everything went down. And so it's a very humbling industry, because you're at the mercy of many factors that you can't control. But what you can control, and it's been a gift for me these past few days that we're working on our Chardonnay blends in the cellar, is that when you do taste wine, you have to, everything else, it's like you put a pause in life, you sit in front of a glass of wine, and you just take a moment to appreciate it and find the attributes that you have, and just kind of, it's a great break.
You talked about making a small amount of wine and making a little amount of Pinot Noir. What is your case production?
So we make about 3,000 cases of Keller Estate wines. And then we make a private label for a hotel chain, the Peninsula Hotels Worldwide. And so that's how we get to 5,000 to 6,000 cases per year.
Got it. And the Peninsula wine that you make is sparkling or Chardonnay or Pinot or all of the above?
It's a Chardonnay and a Pinot Noir.
Okay. So you talk about the challenges of Mother Nature and everything with regards around the difficulty of anticipating things. And you're really a farmer. And so the farmer can know what to do fundamentally and know what to do strategically and have a philosophy on organic, biodynamic, and crop cover and those sorts of things. But you're also at the mercy of Mother Nature. That is extremely challenging. What, in your opinion, after having done this since 2001, what is the most gratifying thing about this industry?
The people. You know, every glass, every person you meet is a story, and it's the most rewarding is to meet people enjoying wine around the world, whether it's a grower. I have a dear friend, Rika, is in Italy. She's been in quarantine for 7 weeks now. Okay. I've been keeping up to date with her, and just knowing that once we get her Prosecco in the US, I'm going to be the first person to run out and buy a case of it. But just the friendships that you do through wine. I think wine brings people together, as you well know.
No, it's so funny you say that, because we don't think there's any more or greater transformative beverage than wine, and it does bring people together. You know the story of Lisa and I. We're both in the medical field. She was an operating room nurse, and when you're in that frenetic environment, you eat standing up. You often don't get to go to the restroom for 10 hours at a time, and it's crazy. But when you have a meal and you have a glass of wine and you get to slow down and you get to talk and you get to visit, and as you said, every wine has a story. So it really is a big business that people don't understand in the mass-produced wines. I'm glad you shared that. Is there anything in the industry that you see as a trend that is exciting to you or concerning to you?
Well, every time I see a small family-owned winery sell to a big guy, a little piece of my heart breaks. And
that makes three of us.
Yeah, and it's sad, because I think a lot of times consumers don't see that. You know, that happens in our wine press releases, but the consumer doesn't see how many small family wineries go under every day. And they don't go under, they just sell to a big corporation. And what happens is I'll get people who will ask me, why can't I get your wine in Atlanta? It's like, because we can't get a distributor in Atlanta, because it's very difficult, or why isn't our wine available here? So that is certainly one of the things that worries me. But I actually, of the positive things that I see is these few days, we've had a lot of support of people enjoying our wine at home, buying wines directly from producers or from people like you guys who support small wineries. So that for me is kind of the silver lining in the sales world. In the production side, I think that people are really looking for more purity in wine. They're looking, Oro de Plata was really relevant about 6 or 7, 10 years ago, when there was only big, huge Chardonnays. This was a trendsetter. I think nowadays you have a lot more variety in the Chardonnays that you get. There's a lot better or more balanced Chardonnays than there was before. I think that we've gotten to a point where there's the American market is a lot more mature, and there's people who know what they want better and can go out more freely and independently to search out what they like. So what I'm trying to say is we had a big trend a few years ago of low alcohol wines. And then we had, but now I think that trend has passed, and some people really enjoy lower, kind of crisper wines, but some people like their fuller wines. And that's okay. And people are more comfortable acknowledging the wine style that they like more frequently now than before.
Well, and I want people to, first of all, I want them to get a couple bottles of this, because it's absolutely stunning Chardonnay. And I'm so, every time I open up one of your bottles, white or red, by the way, I know it's a treat, and it's just something that tickles us, because I know the painstaking care that goes into the production. But I also want people, in addition to buying your wine, I want them to come see you, because your vineyard, and I don't know if your children, I know you have 3 sons and everything, but I don't know if they know that on the first person that gets the first right of refusal, should you ever decide to sell, I thought it was very kind of you to give Cellar Angels that opportunity.
Please don't tell everybody. It's a secret.
But you have a property that is magical, and I don't say that often because we've visited what, hundreds, thousands of properties in the valley over the last 20 years. Yours is interesting because you mentioned you've got the wetlands in front that you can drive by the lane up to your property 100 times and not know it's there. And then when you get up a little bit and you go up this meandering road, there is a little bit of a cathartic release of things starting to just dissipate because it's so beautiful. And then you've got the sheep, and then you've got the wildflowers, and then you have the olive trees. And I think you did a little agricultural on the property and planted a few things. How many olive trees did you plant? Or give me some history on that. I mean, it's insane.
We planted way more olive trees than we need. So we have 36 acres of olive trees. So that's my next, but it's fascinating. The more I get into them, the more I love them. Last year, we produced a beautiful, amazing olive oil, and it's just so different than wine. The same amount of care, but just, wine taste, olive oil tasting is not as much fun as wine tasting.
Trust me, it definitely is not.
Yeah, but I think it also adds, Petaluma is I can't say it enough. It's a multi-agricultural region. Our neighbors have cows. We didn't have sheep before, but there was sheep growing here. There's great produce. The cheeses coming from this area are fantastic. We were the chicken capital of the world for a time. And so this combination of just having so much different agriculture here made sense for us to replicate at Keller Estate. So growing the grapes, the olives, we do beekeeping, and we support the Planet Bee Foundation, which aims to change the world one bee at a time. And we just really feel that that's kind of the best way to keep good balance in nature.
Well, it's interesting. And speaking of balance for nature, you have an initiative or program, Eggs for Tasks. Does that ring a bell?
Sorry, could you say that again?
There's a question about eggs for tasks or eggs for tots. Is there anything with the chickens that has to do with that?
I have no idea. That is a good question, but I have no idea about that.
Is it in the
Gary's asking it.
Gary?
Gary
is asking it.
What is Gary asking?
Eggs for tasks rather than stainless or oak.
Eggs for tasks rather than stainless or oak. Here we were talking about chickens.
Oh, got it.
Okay, so by the way, I was going to talk a little bit about the concrete egg because everyone thinks that's new. Actually, not very new, is it?
No, the French have been using them for many years.
Yeah, 1,000 or so.
A few years. Everything they've done it for thousands of years. So it's irrelevant to say how long they've been doing it.
So, okay, Gary, and I appreciate this question because it's kind of interesting to say, okay, egg, stainless, oak, mix and match. So give us a little bit of repertoire on what you're seeing there.
Well, I guess we started very cautiously with the oak egg. The oak egg is the equivalent of 4 barrels. So
concrete egg.
Concrete egg. So one of the things that I learned from my dad is, go out and make experiments, but just make sure you can live with your experiments. And so we started with 1 egg and just trying to understand how it would work and what it would add to the wine. We've had we wanted to turn that egg is only for white wine. Because as you can imagine, if you use it 1 year for red wine, you can't go back. So we're staying with white wine, but what we know is that concrete has a way of, it actually does enhance the minerality in the wine. And that minerality, again, I always really go out and lick some concrete. That really is that, that flavor that you get, that, good clean concrete, by the way, and wash your hands afterwards.
Yes.
And your tongue probably too. But I think that gives it really this clear, crisp brightness. The stainless steel is beautiful because it preserves that very delicate flavors that the wine has and the aromas. And the oak just gives it beautiful texture. And again, what we said, it just gives the wine length and body. If I get geeky on you, what happens is that the barrel actually, remember, it's wood, and wood is a material that will breathe. And as it breathes, it's bringing oxygen into the wine, and that oxygen actually softens the palate. and makes it a little bit cleaner. When you have those beautiful, really crisp wines that are stainless steel fermented, sometimes they're great. You can feel them in the front of your mouth, but then they just like disappear. And somebody had posted a comment about a Sauvignon Blanc, and some varietals are really well suited for that style, and that's what they were meant for. And I think that's the beauty of there being such a wide variety of wines. You can enjoy a Sauvignon Blanc that's got bright, beautiful crispness, and then you can move to a Chardonnay that has kind of different weightiness to it.
I completely agree. And it's kind of fun from an experiment. It gets back to that science and art balance and interplay. And you see a lot of similarities with classical music and how it's part science and part romance and part emotion. But it's the same thing with the fermentation processes in the fermentation vessel and what you're trying to get out of it. What's happening in the vineyard, what's happening in the fermentation process, and then what comes through in the glass. And the beauty of, I think, what you're doing from a small production standpoint is it's not formulaic. It's not this much oak, this much wood chips, this much mega purple, this much whatever you might have. It's here's what we're going to do. We're going to stick to our philosophy of organic. We're going to stick to our philosophy of pruning. We're going to stick to our philosophy of letting Mother Nature dictate it. And we're just going to let the chips fall where they may and make the best darn wine we can possibly make.
I think that's we definitely don't use any mega purple. I want it for the record out there. For anybody who doesn't know, mega purple, as the name says, adds a lot of color to the wine. And so, one of the beautiful things is when we started making wine, I'm not a winemaker. I know the chemistry behind winemaking, but I am not the day-to-day winemaker. My role is predominantly growing the grapes, managing the team, and managing the blending of the wines. And our winemaker, Julian, his role is really the day-to-day care of the wines once they get to the winery. And his role, what is a great partnership is we've had a few winemakers in our 20-year history. And as I work with a new winemaker, we get to know each other and we get to challenge each other and taste the wines and try to come up with new ideas that will improve the same wines. So I have a historical palate, and with time I've developed. I know how to build their wines. I know what I want the product to be. But Julian's role is to try to make them better. So, one of the things that he and I do is we taste blind. When we're doing blends, he will pull the samples. I will switch them around. We will taste. So he doesn't know what we're tasting. And then we'll come to decisions. And by doing small tricks like that, we both ensure that we're staying as honest as we can to our winemaking process.
I love it. And I like that blind tasting stuff because that's a heck of a lot of fun and very important so you don't have any cognitive bias. I want to wrap up with a comment and then a question. And the comment is really to applaud you and your dedication. And I'll give the audience an example of this because Denise and I were in the Valley one time, probably within the last year, and we had not communicated with you. We did not set anything up in advance, but we texted you and said, hey, we're in the Valley. Would love to come by and see you. And not only did you make accommodations to come see us, you had flown on a red eye back from Chicago, oddly enough, from a tasting, and you sat on the patio and tasted us for about 90 minutes through just an array of your portfolio. That was, to us, we were so overwhelmed and joyed to see you. But to do that on that type of crunched timeline and insanity, with jet lag, mind you, was really something special. And I think that is just the way you carry yourself and how you conduct your business at Keller Estates. So that's to be applauded. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. I appreciate the kindness. I've had, as I said, I have great examples in my dad and in my family. We love what we do. We always been encouraged to find what we love and do it with the utmost care. And so I wouldn't have it any other way. Although I have to say, sitting down and tasting wine with you for 90 minutes meant I didn't have to do either laundry or be with my kids for a while. So I'll give I'm no saint. And here's my dog has decided also to come and join us.
That's fine. And by the way, if you want to vacate from the kids and taste with us for 90 minutes, we're happy to be your muse there. And the other thing, I want to ask a question with regards to this whole quarantining and sheltering in place. It's caused the nation to actually change the way they look at things, how they communicate with people. Right now, we're going through Passover and Easter, so people are doing Seders remotely. They're doing Easter Sunday remotely. What is one thing you will take out of this experience in the future and say this is something we're going to hold on to as a result of this?
Well, you know what? One of the on a personal level, one of the things that I've most enjoyed has been watching my three sons, 13, 17, and 19. They can't be with friends. So their best friends today are each other. So that for me has been the best family gift to date. On a kind of one of the things that we wanted to do is we would love on the business side. You know, we are working away here. We are very fortunate that we're allowed to continue doing our grape growing. I was joking with our vineyard crew that vineyards are social distancing because you've got the rows, right? And they're 6 feet apart. So we're good.
That's
but
right.
I do say one of the things that I've learned is for me today was the first experiment at having an online conversation and seeing if we can translate our passion through a mobile way. I know people will come back and visit us, but I also realize that it's great to be able to take ourselves to you. And for me, that's been the biggest lesson is that we can do a lot of good for our planet if we don't move as much. And if we don't move as much, how can we still be together? So for me, that's kind of the biggest takeaway. I hope we continue these Friday conversations with you for many years to come.
Oh my goodness, we'd be delighted and honored. And I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much for doing what you do and how you do it. And we wish you nothing but peace and health and success. And everybody, please go out and buy some of this wine. It is absolutely astounding. And we will see you next Friday. Anna, you were outstanding. Thanks so much for sharing your evening with us.
Thank you. And cheers, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Cheers, everyone. Be safe.
Be safe.